are mass riots by the far right threatening to erode the country's long-standing democratic foundations and stability. While the iconic Big Ben Tower stands resilient, British society is being rocked by fierce riots over the wave of Muslim immigration. Can the UK hold on to its former peace? Why does Prime Minister Keir Starmer remain calm in the face of the screams and devastation echoing through the streets? In today's video, Anywhere Diary will explore the spark that ignited mass unrest in the UK and the ongoing conflict that could decide the future of Muslim immigrants in a nation that prides itself on democracy and long-term stability. What led to the political and ideological crisis and the immigration crisis? First, it must be mentioned. The riots in end July in the UK were sparked by a tragic incident involving children in Southport. The heartbreaking incident made 3 girls pass away and injured 10 others. False information spread on social networks that the suspect was a Muslim who had recently immigrated to the UK was used by the far right to incite a wave of protests. Despite police publicly identifying the suspect as a British-born man, the riots continued to spread. The wave of Islamophobia has long been smouldering in the hearts of many British people, and just one rumour, whether true or false, related to this topic is enough to ignite a riot. The root cause actually existed a long time ago. Actually, the recent riots in the UK find their roots in a complex web of issues, with the government's immigration policy acting as a potent trigger. Since the 2015 refugee crisis, the UK has seen a surge in asylum seekers, becoming a major destination. However, a critical misstep has been the placement of asylum centres within economically disadvantaged areas already burdened by weak public infrastructure. This has ignited a tinderbox of tension. Cities such as Rotherham, Liverpool and Manchester were the flashpoints of the riots. These are all areas with a history of heavy industry, but have declined over the past few decades, leaving behind high levels of poverty and poor infrastructure. The arrival of asylum seekers intensifies this perception, fostering a sense that immigrants are cutting in line for limited resources like housing, jobs, and healthcare. Besides, it is impossible not to mention Prime Minister Keir Starmer's soft policies of protecting Muslim refugees, but they are a thorn in the hearts of local people. Under Starmer's leadership, the UK government has maintained and even expanded its asylum seeker reception programme, particularly for refugees from countries experiencing humanitarian crises such as Syria, Afghanistan, and parts of Africa. Starmer has emphasised that the UK has a moral and international obligation to assist those fleeing war and violence. Starmer's immigration policy has faced significant opposition from right-wing groups and parts of the public, who argue that the government is prioritising migrants over native citizens. These groups have criticised Starmer's tolerant approach, claiming it puts pressure on the welfare system and creates unfair competition in the job market. This fuels a potent cocktail of frustration and resentment, readily exploited by far-right groups who thrive on stoking fear and anger, ultimately culminating in violence and protest. The final straw for the mounting tension, riots erupted across England, igniting fierce clashes between the people and law enforcement, casting a dark shadow over the once peaceful nation. Between 30 July and 7 August 2024, an estimated 29 anti-immigration demonstrations and riots took place across 27 towns and cities in the UK. Many of these were violent, with participants attacking mosques and hotels housing asylum seekers. Known far-right activists promoted and attended the riots. Over 100 police officers were injured while responding to the unrest, which saw hundreds arrested and charged. Several individuals have already been sentenced. Mutual aid agreements between police forces facilitated a coordinated response, with officers from various regions assisting in maintaining order and protecting vulnerable communities. The National Police Chiefs Council commended the bravery and professionalism of officers who faced dangerous conditions. Authorities anticipate further arrests as investigations into the riots progress. the government mobilized specialist public order officers on an unprecedented scale, cancelling rest days and altering shift patterns. These officers worked over 40,000 shifts during the unrest, with a peak of 6,600 deployed on a single day. The strain on officers was immense, with reports of injuries and concerns about the long-term impact of fatigue. The Police Federation highlighted the critical need for support and resources to ensure the well-being of officers. Over 1,000 people had been arrested for their involvement, with 796 people charged. It also said that the police had identified hundreds more suspects in connection with the disorder, suggesting further arrests and charges will follow. After, the government said 570 people had been brought before the courts. This was the most significant disorder in the UK since the 2011 riots, in which at least 4,000 people were arrested and 1,984 prosecuted. Immediately after the riots broke out in major cities, Starmer convened urgent meetings of the COBRA Committee, the UK government's emergency response body. These meetings were held to coordinate a cross-departmental response, focusing on restoring order as quickly as possible. Starmer directed law enforcement and security agencies to implement immediate actions, emphasising that all participants in the violence would face severe legal consequences. However, many argue that these measures are only short-term and do not solve the deep problems of economic inequality and social polarisation. Following the disorder in the week after the Southport stabbings, several MPs called for Parliament to be recalled sooner. The Prime Minister has so far rejected these calls, reportedly saying his focus was on stopping the disorder and making sure the streets were safe. Besides, according to many opinions, they think that in the current chaotic situation, why does the government still not let the army get involved? Prime Minister Keir Starmer has faced criticism for his response, seen by many as insufficiently strong to the riots and the social tensions related to immigration. Critics argue that the government has yet to address the root causes, particularly the economic and social challenges in the affected areas. Furthermore, some political commentators have pointed out that the slow response to de-escalate the situation, along with a lack of targeted support policies for impoverished regions, has exacerbated the crisis. Some analysts also point out that the government's failure to fully implement its commitments to prevent illegal immigration has also increased skepticism that immigration is out of control, causing anti-immigrant sentiment. It seems that the government of this country has not yet taken any drastic steps to properly handle the case, as well as reduce tensions between the parties. The conflict between British people became even more noticeable when anti-racists and the far right began to take to the streets to protest with the desire for peace and stability of social order. In a surge of defiance against rising xenophobia, thousands of anti-racism protesters flooded the streets of London, Birmingham, Liverpool, and other UK cities. Their action was a direct response to far-right groups' calls for more anti-immigration marches, which had ignited recent riots across the nation. The diverse crowd, comprising Muslim groups, anti-racism and anti-fascist activists, trade unionists, left-wing organisations and concerned locals, united in their opposition to the escalating tensions. Wielding signs that proclaimed immigrants, refugees and asylum seekers welcome, the protesters chanted "London against racism," while beating drums in a powerful display of solidarity. The UK has been grappling with a stark divide over immigration, with consecutive protests representing opposing viewpoints. The situation in London remains tense following clashes between police and protesters, which resulted in over 100 arrests. Britain is currently experiencing its most severe riots and political unrest in a decade. The opulent, once proud image of Britain has been tarnished by disturbing footage of riots, arson, and violent clashes between protesters and police. Unbelievable, the subjects participating in the riots against Islam varied in age, including many children and the elderly, the youngest being 11 years old and the oldest being 69. Businesses in areas affected by recent riots are assessing the substantial damage to their properties and inventory. Major retailers like Sainsbury's, Iceland, Greggs, and Specsavers were among the targets, as looters took advantage of the chaos to ransack stores. Amidst these incidents, mosques and hotels housing asylum seekers were also attacked. While the full financial impact on British businesses remains to be determined, insurance claims are projected to reach tens of millions of pounds. Britain's image as a tourist destination took a battering during the week when several countries, including the UAE, Australia, Nigeria, Indonesia, India, and Malaysia, all advised their citizens to exercise caution and stay away from the riot areas. Actually, having a situation that has been going on since the start of the year, and it's been brought to the forefront following the UK's street riots. The number of police officers resigning from the force has hit a record high, with nearly 9,200 leaving in the 12 months to March 2024. The main reasons for this increase include low pay, harsh working conditions, and a lack of respect from the government. Many officers feel undervalued, and this has had a particularly negative impact on morale. In addition, financial problems and the pressure of the cost of living crisis have also contributed to the decision of many officers to resign. So after a series of riots between civilians and police, the number of officers who will resign will likely continue to increase when the situation is not handled positively or easily. Not just the police, even the government of this country is struggling to come up with a stable policy to calm the situation and control security and order between the two sides, both ensuring the safety of Muslims and not increasing tensions with the far right. The riots may have been temporarily quelled, but there is an irreconcilable contradiction in the minds of the British people. The far right continues to fight for their native rights and cultural identity, while Islam supporters continue to stand up to defend humanity and peace. It is impossible to say who is right and who is wrong, but the way the government is doing things is always a point of discussion. Muslim Council of Britain, MCB, and other human rights organisations urged the UK government not to solely rely on law and order to quell the riots, but to implement more comprehensive measures. They argue that suppressing violence is only a temporary solution that fails to address long-standing social issues. These organisations recommend that the government tackle deeper causes, such as systemic racism, inequality, and growing xenophobia. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper pledged to provide additional support to Muslim communities, particularly through the Mosque Security Protection Scheme. Security forces have been deployed extensively to prevent further attacks on mosques and refugee centres. On the other hand, as part of a broader strategy, Starmer championed open dialogue between different ethnic and religious groups to reduce societal tensions. He encouraged community-based initiatives aimed at promoting tolerance and mutual understanding, with the involvement of non-governmental organisations and grassroots groups. These events and campaigns sought to address long-standing racial and religious divides, which had been exacerbated by the riots. The Starmer government is under fire from all sides. Civic groups and political opponents alike have condemned its handling of immigration and public order. Right-wing politicians, especially within the Conservative Party, have seized on the recent violence to fuel their criticism. They argue that the government's failure to control the flow of migrants and its lack of effective measures to maintain security have led to the current violence. These policies of the new Prime Minister are also predictable based on his previous decisions. However, if the opposition of the far right to Muslim immigrants continues in the future, will there be more chaos? The UK riots serve as a stark warning to Western nations grappling with large-scale Muslim immigration. Far-right movements are gaining ground, fueled by fears of cultural erosion and a perceived threat to national identity. This global dilemma, balancing humanitarianism with societal concerns, has reached a boiling point. The UK must now urgently address these tensions before they escalate further. So what about you? Can you predict the upcoming situation in the UK, as well as other countries in the region facing similar situations? Please comment below so everyone can know. If you found this video insightful, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on our latest content. Don't forget to ring the bell for instant notifications. Your support fuels our passion for creating meaningful content. Thank you for watching.